Okay, so this topic has been on our list since I think literally started talking about the podcast and doing it. So today we are finally doing it. We are jumping in and we are talking about giftedness. Quite honestly, we've been putting it off because it can be so complex. And this might be hard to believe if you aren't deep into content on giftedness, but a very contentious topic.
Yeah, we both say a lot of stuff on the internet, and somehow this is the topic we get the most disagreement and negative comments on. So, are we ready? Because here we go.
Totally. So today we're going to go for it. We're going to dive in. What is giftedness? How is it measured? Why is giftedness a neurodivergence? And why is that contentious? Welcome to Parenting Neurodivergent Humans. I'm Dr. Morgan Beidelman. I'm a psychologist, former teacher, parent to two kids, one of whom is neurodivergent, and I am neurodivergent myself.
And I'm Brianne Colpitz. I'm a school psychologist, parent to two neurodivergent kids, and I'm ADHD, which means I'm autistic and have ADHD. Okay, so first, what is giftedness? Let's start there. At its most basic, giftedness is just a way to describe someone who has a far greater than typical talent or ability in a given area. When people hear gifted, academic intelligence is often the first thing that comes to mind. So, yes, that's totally true, but you can be gifted in lots of non academic ways as well. When you hear words like prodigy or virtuoso, those are describing non academic giftedness. So, the contentious part of this is if giftedness is a neurodivergence. There are people who argue that it is not. However, current research points to the fact that it definitely is. It definitively is, even because MRIs have allowed researchers to look at the brains of gifted kids, and they have found that gifted kids' brains are physically different. Gifted kids have a greater volume and more connections in their cerebral cortex. This allows them to absorb and process information faster. So we're talking like Audubon level speeds of processing. They also stay in their higher absorption phase of development longer than other kids. So they're physically processing more information faster and sustaining that rapid absorption for longer. So the brain is wired differently. And that's what being neurodivergent is. So we're going to go ahead and say case closed on if giftedness is a neurodivergence or not. The science is out, and it is.
Yes. It is also importantly something that is often not well understood. There is more to giftedness than just being really smart or being
Yep.
a musical prodigy. Like other types of neurodivergence, having a brain that processes information differently results in that star or spiky profile, meaning that there are pronounced peaks and strengths, but also pronounced valleys and areas of struggle. Research has started to show exactly why and how this happens in giftedness, and it is super interesting. Like we said, scientists have found that during development, gifted kids have more going on in their cerebral cortex than neurotypical kids. And what's important here is that the cerebral cortex is responsible for higher intellectual functioning. It's where a lot of that like deep thinking comes from. Also, parts of your language centers for your brain. So there's a lot, it's the largest part of our brain. It has four subsections and they have more volume and more connection in that area. But also because there's so much energy going into the cerebral cortex, other parts of the brain often lag in development. This is why you commonly see gifted kids who are, say, 12 years old and intellectually performing at a 17 or 18 or even adult levels. But then socially or emotionally, they might be at a stage that's more commonly associated with kids who are younger than them. So instead of behaving like a typical 12-year-old, they're emotionally or socially behaving more like an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, or at least they do in certain moments. And this can be misread as them being rude or them not caring about having friends or a choice, even.
Right.
But really, what's happening is the way that their brain wiring is developing is causing parts of their brain to develop more and more quickly, and other parts of their brain to be less developed than a neurotypical child who's the same age. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah.
Okay. Similarly, current research is also showing that gifted kids often struggle with executive functioning because of their brain wiring. So remember, the prefrontal cortex is the front part of our brains. It's kind of like right behind our forehead. And it's where our planning and organizing and also parts of our personality are kind of formed, are all in this prefrontal cortex. And because of their brain wiring, they're basically having so much processing that's happening so quickly that their prefrontal cortex gets overwhelmed. Because remember, the prefrontal cortex is developing all throughout childhood, all the way up until about 25 or so.
Right.
And so when you have another part of the brain, you have the cerebral cortex, the largest part of the brain, getting more and more information than the brain is like typically used to, the developing prefrontal cortex can get really, really overwhelmed. And so there's less energy for their prefrontal cortex because so much is going to the cerebral cortex, combined with the fact that there's so much more information to be processed. And so as a result, the prefrontal cortex of gifted kids is literally being asked to do more with less. And so this is why we often see them struggle. They have so much knowledge, so much information, and the executive functioning skills are just overwhelmed and are not able to keep up with the growth and the knowledge and the and the firing and the wiring that's happening. And so we see a lag in those executive functioning skills.
The circuits are being jammed. They're
Yeah.
being jammed.
Yeah. It's like, when there's a sale coming or something, everybody goes to that website
Oh,
and
yeah, 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 yeah. And you're in
and
the
it's like
waiting room
high.
or something? Yeah.
Right, and it's like higher volume than it
Yeah.
typically gets, and the whole website crashes. That's how I think of this,
Yeah.
right? Is like the website that's like, I'm ready for you to purchase. I'm ready for this volume of people to come to my website. And then that's the prefrontal cortex. And then the number of people who actually come, that's the cerebral cortex, which is like, I have all these people or all this information coming in. And then the whole thing crashes in the short circuits.
Uh-huh. Yep. So I do love all this, brain science talk. I find it very fascinating. But I also want to take a quick second to talk about how giftedness is identified. I think this is part of why this is a contentious topic. So, when we're talking about giftedness and when researchers are looking at these brain scans, we're talking about kids who are wired differently, right? But identifying that correctly takes training, time, access, money. I mean, not every kid gets like a brain scan, when they turn 8 or something. So, like, how are we figuring this out? So, academic giftedness is typically measured by IQ with a standard score of 130. So 100 is quote right on the dot average, and then we've talked about like, the bell curve and all of that stuff, but 130 is higher up, right? And so that's the common cutoff for being identified as gifted when it comes to IQ assessment. This is pretty good, I guess. I don't want to go off too hard on IQ assessments. I could, I imagine you could as well, but scientists have tried over the years to remove bias from IQ tests. And I think, some of that has happened. I don't think we're completely there yet. It's still not perfect. It's just never going to be perfect. Okay. So, for example, researchers have found that current IQ tests are still biased towards individuals from Western cultural backgrounds, despite years of working to make the tests less biased. I also think they're really commonly heavily language based. And so if you're processing in a different way or like language isn't your strong suit, then your IQ assessment may not be super valid for your wiring.
And
Um,
you would need a psychologist who is well versed in nonverbal or limited verbal cognitive assessments and know to bring those into the battery
yep.
of assessments to even weed that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's probably not happening in like hey, we're doing this screener to see who's, gifted in second grades.
Right.
So how do like schools get kids in the gifted programs? Many schools have gifted programs or, they did last year. However, in looking at an affordable and fast way to identify kids, like for these programs, districts often have relied on identification tools that can easily confuse gifted kids with a lot of privilege and access. So let me say more on that. So Let's say you're close to the top of your class, you have a large vocabulary in elementary school, you're performing well on academic tests, short tests that are trying to measure IQ, like a screener or something, but are not actually IQ tests. So they might be things that gifted kids would do well on, right? But there's also many things that economically privileged kids with lots of access to learning experience and what we call background knowledge, which is kind of what builds vocabulary and like connections and reading and things like that with content. Those kids would do well on this as well. So, getting into a gifted or academically advanced program at school doesn't always mean that someone is gifted in the neurodivergent sense. So, let's think about that in reverse also. Some gifted kids are actually excluded from gifted programs because of their brain wiring. This like executive functioning demand stuff that we're talking about. Some districts require certain grades or teacher recommendations or screening for skills and habits like task commitment or academic dedication. But being intellectually gifted in the neurodivergent sense does not actually equal academic success. I think we get that so twisted sometimes. Some gifted kids are unlikely to be successful in traditional academic settings without the extra support around executive functioning and or social emotional needs because of the reasons that Morgan just talked about with the brain science. So for example, you have gifted kids that are not in the gifted program because they don't have high grades due to their struggles with executive functioning because they are gifted. Okay, sorry.
Right. Or I still work with schools and I work with a gifted leader. Like that's her area of expertise is in giftedness.
Yep.
And she was doing a big evaluation of their program, and what they were realizing, we were cross-checking kids that were flagged for behavior, and then we were kind of deep diving on each of these kids individually, and there was a whole cluster of them, like literally a whole group of them that we realized were gifted, and they were not performing well. There was definitely executive functioning stuff happening, but they were also bored. The content they already knew because they were so gifted that they had gone off on their own learning tangents. So they knew a lot of the stuff. And so they were bored in class and misbehaving. And that would never have popped for giftedness because they had poor grades. These are middle schoolers. They were not attending class at all sometimes. And so there were all of these barriers that made it look like they needed remediation and additional support, and really they needed to be excelled.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really important. I think as you're saying here, many schools have worked to fine tune their ways of identification or assessing for giftedness. And it varies widely from school to school, state to state, district to district. I think the reality that the gifted identification process is not great has contributed to the societal idea that being gifted is just being super smart and that that's a privilege. A hands down good thing, that these gifted kids are not neurodivergent, they're lucky. And so I
Mhm.
think we get some like supremacy elements in here because we don't fully understand that giftedness is definitely like a double-edged sword.
Yes, totally. But when we're talking about truly gifted kids, this is not true. They are born with, because what we're talking about here is a societal construct. The way that we've constructed our schooling is segregating kids and assuming giftedness or not giftedness based on some type of performance,
Yep,
right? But what we were talking about earlier in the neuroscience is something different. It's not a socially constructed way of dividing kids. It's looking at their actual brain scans and the way that their brains are developing to determine neurodivergence. And I think actually that's part of the reason that this is so contentious is because of the way that a brain develops versus the way that society has divided people up.
agreed.
Sorry, I went off on a tangent.
Well,
Shocker.
that and the fact that we don't have MRI machines at our kindergarten roundups, I mean,
Right, right. Yes. And I will say, I have also seen that happen. I just gave an example in a public school. I've seen it happen in private schools as well, where they've let a kid in based on the premise of them being gifted. And then what happens is because the child is struggling with executive functioning, or maybe they're not as is advanced or even neurotypical in their social or emotional development, then this school that prides itself on supporting gifted learners, that families are paying buco bucks for to have their child go to, that child is feeling othered in that school, struggling in that school, that parents get invited in, and then the school says, you need tutors, you need therapists for your child to be able to stay here. And then they kind of go through all of that. And then the child is like, I guess I don't belong here. I don't fit in. I'm not like everybody else. And the kid is truly gifted, but the school does not understand the actual true profile of gifted individuals. They're working off of the premise, the societal premise
Yep.
of what neurodivergence, gifted neurodivergence looks like, which is like high grades, high performance, working
Well
so
behaved, well
yep, well
behaved.
behaved,
Yep.
right? So I've seen it go both ways. This is not happening just in one sector of schools. It's happening in many, many schools. And I would say the vast majority of schools, even when they are touting themselves as for gifted learners.
Agree 100%. See it so often.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And true giftedness is not about, it's not about privilege or not privilege, right? Like
Yeah.
I it's not about either of those things. It's not about having gone to the best preschool or having not gone to preschool at all, which is I think sometimes thought of as the conversation, and it's
Sure.
not. You could have a child who went to the very best preschool, and you can have a child who didn't go to preschool at all, and both of those kids could be gifted.
Yeah,
Truly.
it's about brain wiring,
Why?
and that exists across like indicators for how
Yes.
we divide people up in society, to your point.
Yeah. And that's really just how kind of intellectual giftedness is identified, and that's because of the skew in the way that we do assessments. And it's not perfect, and a lot of programs don't use IQ or don't like IQ tests, but at least there is a system, and we are far less good as a society of supporting other types of giftedness.
For sure.
Honestly, it's pretty haphazard, and it depends on I've seen it depend on a couple of things, but one of the areas that I think it often depends on is like a teacher or a parent or somebody truly recognizing a gift or a talent of somebody and then putting in the support for that individual. But very, very often, this does not recognize or address the full experience of that gifted neurodivergent profile.
Yeah, and as you would guess, there are lots of impacts for gifted kids if just their giftedness is recognized without their full neurodivergent profile being understood and supported. If you haven't listened to our masking episode, that would be a great one to listen to next because gifted kids are often very high masking, meaning that they use the places where they are gifted, the points of their star, their strengths, to cover up or mask the valleys or their struggles. These kids often also deal with a lot of gaslighting and shoulding when people don't understand that these peaks and valleys are literally how their brain is wired. It's easy to say or think things like, you can do college level math. I know you can remember to turn in this paper. Not the same parts of the brain, peeps. But the fact that they can do advanced math is literally the wiring that's making it hard for them to turn in the paper. So there's a lot to talk about here, so we might need to do another episode. But gifted kids often have other needs like supporting, exploring existential questions, which, due to how they think, which is more deeply, they're more likely to think about earlier and often,
Mhm.
like the meaning of life and what happens when you die, and like all these things where you're like, oh, right, I guess we have to go there. So, and things like social struggles are also super common. Say you're 14, but your niche interest and extreme talent is, I don't know, chemistry or something. And that means that college chem majors are your intellectual and interest peers. But the way your brain is developing means that you have social and executive functioning abilities more akin to those of 12-year-olds. So that mix inherently makes finding friends, academic peers, teachers, all of it very challenging.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I have like so many things I could say on this. What I will say though is just to reiterate something that you said, Brianne, which is if you're finding this interesting and you're wanting more information on it, please let us know because we're interested in it, but our goal here is to serve and support our community. So if you want to know more about this and you have questions, please let us know and we can take those questions and create another episode and a little bit of a deeper dive. Before we finish, I want to give a quick plug to Brianne's parenting support group, the Connected Parent Collective. If this episode resonated for you, her group might be a great fit. This is one of her areas of expertise. Gifted and twice exceptional kids are Brianne's jam. And
It's
so
true.
so if that's your kid and you are looking for more support, please check it out. We will put the link in the show notes. And she has another cohort starting in September, which is a great time to find some additional community as the new school year starts. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week to talk about preparing the environment. Please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it.
And you can probably guess what I'm going to say, but if we're a good fit for you, find us on Instagram. Dr. Morgan is Dr. Morgan Beidelman, and Brianne, that's me, is It's Brianne Colpitts. And you can also find the podcast on YouTube. And y'all, we're on Patreon. Okay. So go over there, follow us, and consider also doing a paid membership so you can hang out with Morgan and I a little bit more.
Yes, we would love to have you there. As always, if you have a question or a topic you want us to cover, like more in-depth information about this topic, or of course, any other topic, please send us a note. You can message us on Instagram or use the Google form in the show notes.
As always, thanks to our editor and producer, Erica Carpenter, and we'll see you guys next week.
See you next week. I feel like I'm almost always in the same outfit.
It's a lot of vaguely different black shirts, to be fair.
Just a quick disclosure, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute a psychologist-client relationship and should not be used in place of an expert evaluation or therapy. I love our parent group so much, so yeah, come join us.
I know. Sometimes I'm like, is it weird to crash it? I want to.
And our special guest this week. Let's think about that. Let's think about that.
Like, Morgan, don't be weird.
Yeah.
Be more weird.